Welcome to the Modern Athenas podcast with Sonia and Debbie, where we discuss how regular women became Athenas in their own time by working hard, persevering through the challenges in their lives, and contributing to a better world. This is podcast 24. In this podcast, we will be discussing the book Canyon Solitude by Patricia McCairen. You can use a link on our website at modernathenas.com to order the book after the podcast. Canyon Solitude takes the reader through Patricia's journey of self-discovery as she leaves her life of comfort and stability and heads west. She lives a life of adventure out west, drifting through the high plateaus of Colorado, learning how to be a river guide down many of the most dangerous and beautiful rivers, and, through it all, she demonstrates why sometimes in life it is better to leave the safety of the known for the adventure and uncertainty of the unknown. After Patricia had been out west for a significant period of time, she returned back to her life in New York City, but she couldn't shake the desire to return again to the west and to her life out in the open plains and the mountains. She decided to solo navigate the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. It wasn't her original plan, as we'll discuss later, but it became her plan. And as she was met with great skepticism by everyone, experienced river guides, friends, and colleagues, she continued on. She was a woman, they said. How could she possibly survive on the river on her own? She was not experienced enough, they criticized. How was she going to survive so many days on the river alone? She didn't know enough about rafting technique and wasn't strong enough, they judged. How could she possibly be able to navigate the dangerous rapids? But most of all, they said, no woman had ever traveled solo down the river without portaging. It simply couldn't be done. But like all modern Athenas, Patricia pushed aside the critics and followed her dream. She set her raft afloat down the river and, through her rafting, discovered that not only could she survive, but that she could thrive. Her inner strength, determination, and courage remind us all that in life, you have to keep taking risks and moving forward to new adventures because the true rewards are found beyond the edges of your comfort zone. Here is her story. The first light tear in Patricia's tether to the secure world of New York City occurred when she chose a canyon trip for a vacation. She booked the trip based on the recommendation of a fellow traveler as they trekked through Nepal in the previous autumn. Patricia had wanted to pick somewhere in the U.S., and her companion suggested a rafting trip through Grand Canyon. At that point, the closest Patricia had ever been to a boating experience was the Circle Line trip around Manhattan. She had never slept under the stars and had no idea what whitewater was. When she got home and pitched the idea to her friends, no one was interested in joining her. So, as she often did, she went alone. After the trip, when she returned home, she expected to fall back into her old patterns and routines, but, quote, something deeper had happened on the trip, something I didn't understand. A stranger had emerged in the canyon, and she fought to remain present. I was born again on the Colorado River at the bottom of Grand Canyon, 35 years after my initial birth in New York City, end quote. But the truth was, she had a secure life in New York, a job that gave her access to the world, great friends, a good social life, and a rent-controlled apartment. Wasn't it time for her to settle down, to think about stability for the long term, to work toward a higher promotion, good income, and retirement? It wasn't time for her to chase some dream about returning to Grand Canyon, was it? Or was it? Quote, the same fear that has kept me stuck in life so many times before, afraid to move forward, to take a step that would free me from the ordinary, the mundane, the insufferable. A crippling fear that deadens my potential and limits my relationship with the world. It's so easy to cling to the familiar even when it's deplorable, living your life chained to a job you hate in order to buy heaps of possessions that mitigate your job stress but keep you tied to earning a steady income is not a real way to live, end quote. So Patricia gave up her life in New York City and moved west, chasing her dream of the nomadic life, one consumed by experiences, not material possessions. But eventually she did return to New York, climbing back into the rat race and relegating her adventures and freedom to memories tucked into the recesses of her mind. But she never did settle back into city life. She had changed in her time away, and no longer was she interested in a stable and secure life. What she wanted was adventure. So Patricia was a traveler, even when she was sort of living in New York, and she wanted to kind of trek around somewhere in the U.S. So she goes on this trip to Grand Canyon, and she kind of gets bitten by this bug or this allure, and then she goes back to her job, and then she discovers really she kind of gets this wanderlust bug, and off she goes, but then she gets pulled back, and so you're kind of seeing this like little push and pull of her life of, do I want security and stability, or am I willing to risk it?
Well, and this seemingly dramatic decision, that she's considering, and maybe more outwardly so, to her family and friends. It seems like it was kind of an undercurrent for a long time, whether she could articulate it or not. And I think that sometimes those dramatic life changes on the outside really have been kind of bubbling up for a long time. And it seemed to be the case with Patricia too.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think a lot of times, friends, family, all they see is like that instant decision that you're making. They don't see all that thought that's gone into it. And, maybe it's months, maybe it's years, maybe it's, it's probably been very well thought out. And for her, you're right. I think it was something that she had really been thinking about. And, you see it when she talks about, it already started in Nepal, right? She wanted to go somewhere different, do something different. And, she'd been planning it. She wanted friends to come along with her, and no one wanted to go with her on this trip. So it had already been bubbling. And then she goes on the trip and it kept bubbling. And the fact that, she hadn't been sharing it with other people didn't mean that the undercurrent wasn't still there. And so, she had kind of already been traveling this journey even before she went on the trip. And then she continued traveling the journey when she got home. And so you're right, that sort of push pull was already going on in her mind long before, she had made any of these decisions. So once again, Patricia found herself wanting to head back to Canyon. But what would this trip look like? When she had been out west before, she had become a river guide on some of the most difficult rivers, but she had been unable to break into the male-dominated river guide industry that ran the rapids through Canyon. Could she be her own guide down the Colorado? Quote, "The National Park Service requires a permit to run the Colorado River through Grand Canyon, the most sought-after permit in the river world. While it's difficult to obtain a permit to run the Grand, it's even more challenging to put a trip together. In the 277-mile length of Grand Canyon, there are approximately 75 named rapids, plus numerous riffles. An accomplished boatsman I know claims that a rapid is nothing more than water running downhill over rocks. The rafting industry knows otherwise." End quote. There is a guidebook that lists each rapid and the possible lines through the rapid, noting the different obstacles, including holes and sharp rocks. But ultimately, navigating the whitewater took skill. It wasn't about how strong or fast you could row through the rapid. It was about how skillfully you could make tight turns, how effortlessly you could make the water do the work for you, and how much you could leave fear behind. And it was risky. There was a reason that groups ran the river together. There was plenty of support for the treacherous sections. Travel routes through each rapid could be discussed, and each raft could support the one behind it. Adjustments could be made by each successive raft, and there were plenty of people to assist if a raft went over while negotiating the rapid. If you go alone, there was no room for such mistakes. But Patricia had made up her mind. She was going to go. And when she pitched the idea to all of her friends, again, no one wanted to go with her. She was cautious, though, about who she asked. After all, she didn't want to spend over 200 miles down the river with someone who was merely an acquaintance, who might not want to speak to her after 3 days. But finding that no one wanted to go with her, she considered then going solo. But, quote, the agony of trying to decide something that could affect the rest of my life, the difficulty of looking into the future, weighing unknown consequences against unknown odds. I questioned my sanity, my ability, and my ego. What qualified me to consider rafting the Colorado River alone? Was I really as capable as I wanted to believe? If everyone thought I was crazy, would that dissuade me? How much of my ego was tied up in doing this trip? Was even part of my decision based on wanting the approval of others? End quote. So Patricia has gone on her 1-week trip. She's come back to New York. She's gone out west. She's learned how to be a river guide. She's come back to New York. And now she's going to go on this trip down Grand Canyon. And she's decided that, she's wanted to go in a group, can't go in a group. So she wants to go, with another person. She can't find anyone to go with her. So now she's thinking about going solo. And now she's asking herself sort of all of these questions that I think anybody that's getting set or wants to go on like a really quite intensive sort of solo journey would be asking themselves, right? Like, is this just something that's going to feed my ego? Is this something that I can do? Is this something that is it fear? Is this something, I don't know. I mean, I think these are all just very normal questions to be asking.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about a couple different things. One, I could easily imagine these conversations that she was having with her friends and family, and she's trying to convince them about, her dream. Really, it's her dream, but why they should maybe join her. And she's probably disappointed that they don't want to, but I think she realized at a certain point it didn't invalidate the 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 importance of her decision and her dream, because it was a really strong and thoughtful and committed decision that she had. And what I was also thinking about is that, when you're questioning yourself about, is this the right decision? Is this a good decision? I think it's important, and it's also difficult to seek input from those in your family and friends to kind of test those questions. But at the same time, the decision is right when it kind of withstands that questioning and you still want to do it.
I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes those decisions aren't something that you want input from. I mean, I don't know. I think input is good on certain types of decisions, but I think there's also some decisions like that you got to make for yourself, right? Um, there's that sanity check, right? I mean, so something like this, I'm sure most of her friends and family were like, are you kidding me? Like, this is a very bad idea. And as I was talking about in the intro tonight, and everybody told her this is a bad idea. Don't do this. Don't go solo. And the only woman that had done it before her solo had portaged. And for people that don't know what portaging is, it means you carry your boat through sections. This wasn't something that women did alone. And so if she had listened to all the input, it was all negative coming in. And so she would never have moved. And so I don't know. I understand why you would want to get that input, but then there's this part of me that's like, why? Why allow all that negativity to come in? I don't know. Sometimes I feel like better to listen to yourself, because you're also sometimes your own best guide.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying about that. I mean, obviously, and we'll talk a lot more about solitude. That's half the title of the book coming through. But I think that those times of solitude really are beneficial and can really help you hone in on what is important for you. And I think there's some category of decisions and that kind of I've found are helpful, whether it's gaining those family and friends, just some sort of buy-in, even though you're going to do this crazy thing, by getting their input. But I felt like I still know it's a good decision if it's withstood that questioning and that criticism, and I still feel it's 100% right. But I understand what you're saying. There's kind of there's different times at which that input is helpful or not.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. I mean, I definitely think there's definitely, there's two categories of those decisions. And, I was also thinking as she's talking about this, it's like, where is that line between something that's going to be a good challenge and something where you're just setting yourself up for failure? And if you are setting yourself up for failure, why are you doing that? And I think sometimes, wow, you're splitting hairs. And are you conscious that you're splitting hairs? Again, everybody's telling her this is an impossibility. Like, what inside of her is driving her to know that this isn't that she's not setting herself up for failure? Is it her experience being a river guide, or is it just this little something in her gut? That's just telling her like, no, I think I can do this. Like, is it, and then, she's talking a little bit about that, right? Is it ego driving that? Or is it just the sense that she has? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not her. But I would imagine that all of that was swirling, and I don't know that there's a good answer for that. I'm not sure that there is a black and white answer. I think that all of those things sort of feed themselves, or kind of feed on each other. Patricia decided to go solo and applied for her river permit. When she began to tell her friends and family that yes, indeed, she was going to run the river solo, the reaction she got generally depended on the person's gender. Quote, men were intrigued and women were scared. Men expressed envy and a desire to do a solo trip themselves. Women expressed fear, advising me to latch on to another trip. Inadvertently, I had aroused the respect and admiration of men. I wanted it from women. I wanted their support, a sisterhood that encouraged us to break away from dependence. I didn't get it. End quote. It was interesting because I had actually thought she was going to get the opposite reaction. And I was kind of wondering, like, why is it that this is very, I don't know. I think I find this very stereotypical. It's like, why is it that men have no fear about doing things alone, but then women have this intense need to do things together? It's like latch on to another group. Like, what is this fear women tend just seem to have about going at it alone? I don't know.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. When you say women go as a group, I think about like when you're out to a restaurant and like it's the joke that no women can't go to the bathroom alone, like you have to bring someone with you. Anyways, maybe that's a college age thing, but
No, it absolutely still applies. Still applies.
but I was almost wondering if like I bet the men were genuine in their intrigue because because maybe there's almost permission for them to have that, and maybe the women just didn't allow themselves to think beyond their obligations in a sense. But so that was one thought I had, but I think that maybe the men also didn't want to be shown up by a woman. I don't know. Maybe that's a really, you know, stark generalization. But if they were seeing this woman being brave and kind of stepping out of the box, they might they would take attention, I think, to that.
Yeah, and I mean, you kind of hear it at different parts of this book, but the river guide industry is very chauvinistic. She had a very difficult time breaking in and couldn't break in. And so I don't think that they were terribly excited with the prospect of her succeeding on the solo trip by herself, because what would that say about them? And what would that say about women as river guides? I don't know. It's just the whole thing, and this whole sort of gender uh, issue with the guiding just was pretty interesting.
Well, it sounded like she wanted her women friends to say, "You go, girl," like, and they didn't. And she talks about she wanted their support and a sisterhood that encouraged them to break away from dependence. And I think that's that might still be remaining there. That women are kind of expected to that they will become dependent and that men will be fearless. But I think that sometimes those labels are damaging in themselves because it doesn't allow women to be or men to be anything else.
Yeah, I don't know. I have to admit, like when I read this quote the first time, I was like, that is just not true. Um, I don't think a single one of the women I know would be like, yeah, don't go. Every single woman I know would be like, go, go, go. And they'd be like, take pictures, post, take photos, and keep them and journal and send and write. And I mean, I would have 1,000 packages and pieces of mail at the drops. And I mean, I have just such a supportive network. Of course, there would be the people that think I'm absolutely insane, but then I have a whole network of people that always think I'm insane. But they're so supportive, right? So, but that's just who I surround myself with. And so maybe that's part of it too. Maybe she didn't have those people around her because those weren't the type of people that she surrounded her with. So part of this I was reading and I'm like, you need to get new friends. Because I was thinking to myself, well, these people don't empower you, they disempower you. So there was a little bit of that too. And then I was feeling like, oh, Patricia, go get yourself some new women friends.
Well, and also she seemed to be kind of internalizing this dream for so long, and maybe she didn't feel like she had anyone she could kind of talk about that with along the way. And so when it became this dramatic, quote unquote, dramatic life decision, she was already further down the path than her friends ever could be with her on this on how committed she was. So I think you're right, though. She needs some transition and transformation in her friends.
Yeah, she needed new girlfriends, period. Like I don't know. Maybe some phone numbers or email. I don't know. She needed some new ones. Patricia spent the months leading up to her trip planning each element in excruciating detail. Planning a trip down the river was no small feat. You had to carry your supplies with you in dry bags. Your raft had to not only be in good working condition, but sturdy enough to survive the rapids. At the same time, you had to be able to push and pull your raft in and out of the water and to be able to flip it back over on your own after you tossed it out in a rapid. Your knot skills were tested as you had to lash your dry bags and gear onto the raft. You had to balance the gear to keep the raft afloat. If the gear was unbalanced or unsecured, one flip over on a mistimed rapid would leave your gear floating down the river as you gasped for breath, flipped the raft back over, pulled yourself in, and began bailing out the water. In short, it took an experienced guide not only to navigate the rapids, but to navigate the logistics. One mistake, and you could be stranded in the middle of the river. Securing the permit was another hurdle. When Patricia won a permit in the lottery, she expected it to be sent to her. Instead, she received a call from the ranger, asking her if she really knew what she was getting herself into. Would a man have received the same phone call? Finally, the day arrived. She would drive out from Flagstaff with a friend who would drive her truck back to the city and then to the end of the river to meet her weeks later. Quote, I gripped the steering wheel tightly in an attempt to quiet the nagging voice that questions the wisdom of setting out to raft the Colorado River alone. An impetuous decision born of loss and despair, one that on serious reflection would probably be abandoned as easily as a winter coat on the first day of spring. River running is a group endeavor. In the past 60 years, only a handful of people have traversed the fluid pathway of the Grand Canyon alone. Of that handful, only one was a woman, and she took her trips in the early 50s, when the river was warmer than it is today. I admit I'm intrigued by the possibility of being the first woman to solo the canyon without portaging any of the rapids, but all of that is secondary. The need to resolve the unresolvable questions in my life is what drives me into this vast canyon and into my soul. End quote. So you got like two things going on here. First of all, she's a planner, and prior planning is excellent. So I'm a big fan of prior planning. So you got that going on. But then you've got this whole other thing in this quote at the end that I want to talk to after we talk about planning. And it's all about, the need to resolve unresolvable questions. So before we move to the next section, remind me because I want to come back to that. But let's talk about her planning first.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can relate to this. I'm all about like timelines and checklists. And I can imagine her, laying all her gear out in her living room or, just doing a bunch of research, buying stuff on Amazon, like having everything she needed to do. And I think that probably that unknown factor would drive her to be like incredibly thorough. I can kind of picture it in my mind. So, I think that was definitely to her credit that she was ready. She was not going to fail because she hadn't planned.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that quote like you fail if you don't, or you plan to fail, or you fail if you don't plan, or something. I don't know what the quote is, but I mean, definitely she knew with her river guiding experience, you had to have your logistics on lockdown when you got on that river. And I think that this was also one of those things where she could control that part of it. She wasn't in control of the rapids. She wasn't in control of the weather. She wasn't in control of the river itself. She wasn't going to be in control of what happened, but she could definitely be in control of the logistics of her raft, and of all of that all that type of stuff. And so she could, in essence, sort of control her game plan. And I feel like that kind of gave her some peace of mind, and enabled her, in essence, to kind of control part of her journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we kind of have this other side of her preparations where it's down to the end. She's about to drop her raft in the water, essentially, and she's starting to doubt herself, or they're resurfacing. I bet, and I can totally relate to this. I mean, I'm sure most people can, but doubts are completely natural. Questioning yourself on your own abilities and everything. And I'd like to think that indicates that we care about the outcome. And it's because we want things to go so well. But, also it also can mean a point of growth is there. It's a kind of a signal that we need to grow and fill in some sort of gap in our skills, or like she says, these questions, answer them. So I could totally relate to the way she was kind of reacting in these last moments before she was going to go on this solo journey.
I think she's got like two different things going on. I think she's got just what I call like the verbal head vomit going on, where it's like that constant stream of like, was this the stupidest idea I've ever had? Or was this the greatest idea I've ever had? And like that endless stream of doubts and concerns and thoughts just running through her head. And as she's getting closer and closer and closer to the insert point, it's going faster through her head. And she's, she's got to make that decision of, is she going to drop into the to the water. And just to ruin the ending, yes, she does go into the water. She does insert, and we'll get to the trip here in a moment. But so there's that sort of side that's happening in her mind. But part of this quote that I latched onto was, "The need to resolve the unresolvable questions of my life is what drives me into this vast canyon." So it's not about wanting to go down the canyon. It actually has very little to do about wanting to raft the canyon. It's about this need to resolve the unresolvable questions of her life. So she says it's about wanting to travel solo down the canyon. That's what she told all of her friends and family. Remember, she says it's going to be a great adventure. And everybody said, don't go solo. It's a bad idea. And she says, no, I want to. No woman has gone before alone. And yeah, it's not about that at all. It's about the need to resolve the unresolvable questions of her life. So again, we're back to this notion of you've been planning something for a long time. All of a sudden you make a decision. It doesn't make sense to anybody else. And, people are like, what is going on? And that's exactly what happened. People didn't understand why she would go solo. Well, here's your answer. She wants to resolve the unresolvable questions of her life.
Yeah, it represented kind of probably all the things she was fearing in her life and that she was insecure about, or she also really felt that she could overcome, and she needed to prove to herself that she was capable. And for her, it seemed to represent all of those things.
Yeah, and I mean, I do wonder if, before this moment, she even knew that that's why she was going down the canyon. The days on the river began to run into each other. Running the river solo was much different than running it as part of a group. Patricia appreciated the difference. Quote, "What a privilege it is to have the time, equipment, and ability to raft the Colorado River alone. I do what I want, when I want, how I want. I dawdle around camp in the morning and choose my own pace on the river during the day. I hike side canyons that entice me and pass up those that do not. I dress without regard to style or appearance and undress when and where I want. There is no one with whom to discuss the day's plans, no one to insist on doing something I don't want to do. There is no one else to see, no one else to comment, no one to criticize my actions and idiosyncrasies. Every choice of every moment in every day is mine alone." End quote. So I've done some solo traveling, and I can agree with what she's saying. It's incredibly freeing to be by yourself and to basically not have to answer to anyone. It's just this, it creates a lot of space. And by creating space, you actually can hear yourself.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it can also be kind of a scary place. If for myself, I think I thrive on the external obligations that I have in my life at times, but I think it's in those times of quiet solitude, traveling on my own or doing an activity by myself for an extended period of time that I've actually realized that I have my own thoughts about things, or it kind of strips away what is naturally there constantly during every day.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, sometimes the silence can be very loud, but it also can be very quiet. So, I mean, it definitely, it can change. And I think over a long period of time, traveling alone or being alone can change you, and it can also, change sort of its impact on you. But for the short term, I think it often can have a positive impact.
I was reminded of the first time I traveled to Europe, not the UK, and it was in college. I went to Lucerne for 3 weeks, and I was playing in an orchestra and living with a host family. And I'd never been in a country that didn't speak English as its first language. And so over the beginning of those 3 weeks was really stressful. I don't know why I was so stressed. I mean, I was doing music, which was what my everyday was filled with anyway, but I felt very, very alone. But then by the second week and then by the third week, I had really almost given myself permission to embrace this experience. And so I think sometimes there's that transition from the kind of the silence being really deafening to it being really calming, and you have to kind of permit yourself to enjoy it.
And I think you can also find noise when you want to find noise. I mean, it doesn't have to be, being alone doesn't have to be completely silent either. So you can invite noise into your space in different ways. So it's not just, you don't have to just invite people, you can also invite sort of noise or sound. Being alone, though, isn't always so simple. Quote, "Hard Rock Rapid is a menacing, ominous collision of water against rock. I stand quietly on the left bank overlooking the rapid, looking to see what route I would take through it. A shaft of sunlight filters through Ryder Canyon on the opposite shore, lighting up a small portion of green water like a spotlight on a stage. Tranquility and turmoil bounce side by side. Subtle sounds are drowned out by the turbulence of the river. My heart rate quickens, my mouth grows cotton, my stomach forms a knot. A fleeting thought sweeps through my mind. So this is what it's like to be alone." End quote. And I think in that moment, she's looking at this pretty ominous rapid in front of her that she's going to have to navigate. And right then, she's feeling pretty lonely.
Well, and I think it's probably also she realizes she alone has to step up and she alone has to do the work, and it's an opportunity for her. And kind of, we were talking a little bit earlier in this episode about maybe this expectation that women are dependent, and here it's almost like this intense role that she now has of independence. And for me, I think that can feel really alone for myself, when I realize that no one else is going to do this for me, or, whatever decision I need to make. And it's really up to me to make it happen. That can feel very alone, but it's actually, if you can just get over that first step, it can be very empowering.
And I think that there's different levels of independence, right? So I think she already knew she could she'd been on the river for a while. I mean, she knew that she could do it. She knew that she could make it day to day, but then she encounters this rapid. This is harder than the other rapids. This is more challenging than the others. And so it's this different degree of sort of challenge that she's met with. And it's a harder hurdle. And so you're right. She's standing there and she's going to have to empower herself. And so this is a harder challenge for her. And if she can get over it, it is empowering. But this is kind of taking it to the next level. And it does feel a little alone. She doesn't have anybody to hold her hand. She doesn't have anybody to talk her through it. She's got to kind of wander this one and navigate this one by herself. And it is empowering if she can get through it, but she's got to get through it. And that moment where she kind of has to step off and go, that can be pretty scary. Being alone for so many hours on the river led Patricia to reflect on many aspects of her life, including her social anxieties. Quote, "I always felt awkward, never certain I was doing the right thing, never quite fitting in. Even when I was praised, I wondered if the person meant it, and when there was a discord, I might argue my side, but it left me unnerved. If I won the argument, I felt guilty and fretted about upsetting others. I worried about what I had done wrong and what was wrong with me, and why I couldn't express what I wanted without displeasing everyone. A pang of fear would hit the pit of my stomach, and I'd slip off to be alone and nurse my wounds while everyone else presumably had a good time. If we abide by other people's standards, we become shadows of ourselves. Too often when I'm with other people, I head over my freedom and values as if they are the price of admission to companionship. I expect others to be as harsh with me as the critic living in my mind." End quote. Yeah, so she's definitely got some social sort of anxiety problems and this kind of awkwardness that she has. And, there's so many people out there that suffer from this. And a lot of people prescribe sort of thoughts and feelings to other people, and that just, they aren't there. But we prescribe them, and it impacts our relationships.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there's I don't know what the magic number is of people in a room, but once a certain number of people exceeds, I don't know, 25, maybe even might be too high. I definitely could relate to some of what she's talking about. I much rather be able to be in kind of a more intimate setting with a small group where I feel like I can maybe read people better. But yeah, I definitely probably try to assume, and as I've grown older, this has gotten better, but especially when I was younger, I would definitely assume what people were thinking about me. And, you become very self-conscious about your yourself in a certain situation. And as I've grown older, maybe it's just I have less energy at certain times where I'm not going to waste it on feeling that way as much. But it's hard. It's hard to be in, new situations or just situations that feel like they're not setting you up for your best self.
Yeah, one of my sort of social anxiety, if you want to call it that, problems is like this negative self-talk that I do when it relates to other people. And so it's a kind of a killer. And I try and stop it because I know it's happening, but I can't. And it's, it's one of these things where it's like I perceive situations very differently than they're actually happening. And, it's hard to handle. And I understand what she's saying. If her point about we abide by other people's standards, we become shadows of ourselves. And, you've got to kind of get over that negative self-talk and kind of step out of that and realize that people don't they don't think things about you the way that you see yourself, right? So their perception of you is very different probably than what you think that their perception of you is. And so you kind of have to put yourself out there a little bit, and you have to kind of step out of your comfort zone. And, sometimes maybe you just have to have that discussion with them about like, or tell them your expectations of the relationship or, whatever you want to call it. And, it's hard. I don't think that getting over social anxiety or awkwardness or negative self-talk or anything related to this sort of thing is easy.
Yeah, well, maybe that's why I never really liked parties. I would be like, all right, I've made an appearance. I'm out of here. I'm going to go like do something else. But yeah, I am not, I hate it.
I am the last person that you're going to drag to a party. Like people that are listening to this and know me, they're like, I have never seen you at a party. I'm absolutely the last person on earth that ever wants to go to a party. So don't invite me to parties. It's not my thing. I don't know. By the way, I should write a book like the 101 ways to get out of going to a party.
Now, dance parties with Ethan in the living room. Now that's different. Like I will let it all out on the dance floor here in our living room. But yeah, forget about it. I'm not gonna. I'll make an appearance, but that's about it.
People that know me well know that they think I'm an extrovert. I'm actually an introvert until you get to know me very well. And so, yeah, I'm not into these huge social events, partying. Not at all. I'd rather stay home and read a book, which is perfect because I podcast. But yeah, but parties, not as much now. Patricia had plenty of time to think about her fears. Quote, my emotional fears may not be as tangible as the rivers, rocks, or holes, and they may be easier to deny, but not by dealing with them. I'm running the same rapid over and over, going into the same holes that continually tear me apart. I'm repeating mistakes by not looking at myself and accepting the fears that are a part of me. They need to be acknowledged in the same way that the river's obstacles require attention. Fears must be embraced, treated like friends instead of enemies, acknowledged the same way I respond to whitewater, with reverence and respect. End quote. So I don't know. I mean, do we waste time running the same rapid over and over with fears? I don't know. I definitely think there are some things that I fear that I tuck away, and there are other things that I try and kind of hit head on.
Yeah, I'm much more likely to hit it head on if I feel like I can have a plan and I'm going to commit to it, and I see the benefit to, achieving whatever it is. And I was reading Fears Must Be Embraced, Treated Like Friends Instead of Enemies. I'm going to take you back to music school for a second. And as an oboist in music school, you spend a lot of time practicing orchestral excerpts. So these are like little solos from symphonies and things that you're going to play on audition. And they always have the same ones. And there was this one from a tone poem by Richard Strauss, Don Juan. And it's like one of the hardest, awkwardest excerpts ever, and I hated it and I couldn't play it. So I decided I was going to play it like 25 times a day in every key and like just totally like nail it and put my, just attack it. And it really was an enemy, but not that it became a friend, but I really had to kind of immerse myself in it so that I kind of lost that fear that I wasn't going to be able to do it. And, that really worked. But sometimes I feel like not all fears are that tangible.
No, I definitely agree. I think that sometimes fear um, isn't tangible at all, and sometimes it's unapproachable. And some of the problems with that is sometimes those intangible fears grow and grow and grow, and then they start becoming something more than fear. They become like terror. And then you've got yourself a problem. So you don't want to get in that situation. But fears that are conquerable, I'm all for conquering. I'm all for attacking them. I'm all for figuring out how to get rid of them. But yeah, what do you do with those fears that are just unconquerable? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. Being alone on the river also made Patricia conscious of her dependency on others. Quote, and in being faced with true independence, I begin to see the pieces and bits of dependency that cling to me. The dependency of wanting to be rescued that goes far beyond the desire to have another person present in the event I hurt myself. I still carry the belief that being dependent is feminine and attractive. That's the catch. I want autonomy, but if I achieve it, I fear I'll be unlovable. End quote. This one hit pretty hard. So she's got these little bits of dependency. She wonders if being dependent is a good or a bad thing. And so, for me, it's kind of this question of is dependency all bad? Is it maybe good to have people that you depend on, for support? And again, maybe it's this sort of dichotomy or this line, right? Like dependency is not bad, but you don't want to be too dependent.
Yeah, and I was thinking about I think dependency actually starts with really good intentions. Like if you're going to talk about women, I know myself, I want to nurture others, I want to build them up, and I want to, I almost, you have to kind of watch that line that you're about to cross when you're over, you're almost neglecting your own needs and wants, and you're depending on your value in being able to provide for other people. And as a mom, I definitely felt that really strongly. But, I think it's also easy to kind of be blind to those bits and pieces of dependency, and or maybe it's denial. I'm not really sure, but I know that there was a time in my life where I was very dependent on the relationships that I had. And, I'm not entirely sure why, other than maybe I just wasn't surrounding myself with people who were kind of requiring me to stand on my own either. So I think it's a two-way street.
On the seventh day afloat, Patricia runs into a group of 6 men and 1 woman. The woman expresses awe at Patricia's decision to go solo down the river. She says she wanted to try the Green River alone, but just hadn't gotten up the courage. Patricia's reaction to the group, however, surprised even her. Quote, my anxiety meter shoots up as it registers a need for guidance and approval, a yearning to accommodate and entertain, to show these 7 strangers how brave and independent I am. Since they're mostly men, I also need to show my feminine side. In the few moments since they entered my space, I'm ready to throw away my independence and question my personal belief system, as if their approval will validate my actions. The self-assurance that was mine the first 6 days on the river vanishes like the delicate petals of a flower under a strong wind. End quote. So she's strong, she's independent, she's doing it on her own, she's figured it out, and then here comes this group. And suddenly she's just like a wilted, she just wilts.
Well, in a way, she's, obviously, as we all are, still a work in progress. I feel like she's gotten a taste of what she can accomplish. And it's about then, she hasn't yet transitioned back into life, whatever that will be. And so I felt like this was almost like a little taste test of how well she's going to be able to stand up on her own. It's almost like like a little test.
Yeah, I think it was, 6 days in, I think she was probably alarmed at how bad this was. because she had psyched herself up for a long time that she could do this alone. And she had made it for 6 days alone. So she was pretty psyched. She was like, okay, this is cool. I can do this. I've got this. This is great. This is awesome. Here we go. I'm on it. And she's doing the rapids and she's living on her own and she's camping and she's got everything and the logistics are going well and the weather's not bad and the river's doing well. And she is just on top of it and she's just cruising along. And then she hits this group and it just falls apart. And so all of a sudden she's realizing not so far has she come and she's got a long way to go and it's not going quite as smooth as she thought and it's just not as easy. And it's exposing, really. It's exposing herself to her. And, it's kind of like ripping these, not even ripping scabs off. She hasn't even gotten scabs yet. And it's just, I think all of a sudden she's realizing how much work she has left to do. Quote, a myth existed for many years and lingers still that maintains it takes a large, powerful man to row a boat through whitewater. The truth is, it takes brains to run a rapid, not brawn. The key to a flawless run is understanding the dynamics of the river. The direction and velocity of the current, the power of a hydraulic, and the force of a cresting wave deliver specific messages to be read and examined closely, like important documents. End quote. When Patricia comes across a male-dominated group on the river, she decides to spend the night with them at their pull-out point. The one woman in the group, Lynn, opens up to Patricia about the difficulties of being a woman guide on the river. Patricia knows all too well, having been shut out of the male-dominated industry herself. By the next day, however, Lynn has closed back up and put her armor back on. Quote, how often have I been in this same situation? Women's thoughts and feelings and talk are minimized because they do not fit into a male society. Where does that leave us if we want to become professional boatwomen on the Colorado? Do we have to give up our femininity? There are women who seem to be able to balance the two sides. They maintain their identity as women and row heavy boats through big water. But they are less than 10% of the guiding population. How many women will be allowed to join the ranks before the number intimidates the entrenched male community? How many new boatwomen will those women who are already established as guides allow to join their ranks? Too often jealousy keeps women from helping each other gain access to what has been a male-dominated arena. End quote. And I was reading this paragraph and I was thinking of Candace DeLong in the FBI book, but we've seen this before in male-dominated industries. First there's a question of how do women break in, and then are women going to help other women up the ladder, or are they going to stomp on them on their way up?
Yeah, I was thinking about the Rocket Girls too, how they actually were the opposite side, where they were actually helping each other up the ladder, and also in Hidden Figures. But I was thinking about Candace as well, and that jealousy. And there's kind of a choice, it seems, in these male-dominated environments, where the women that we've seen who seek excellence and high standard refuse to be a novelty. They refuse to be kind of that woman who, the first woman who whatever. They just want to be the best FBI agent, or the best lighthouse keeper, or and so I think that's where that confidence comes from too, and you're not just seeking to stay kind of win the praises of everybody.
Yeah, I agree. Generally, women aren't focused on being barrier breakers, right? They're not focused on being the first anything. They're focused on bearing down, grinding, and doing a great job. They're very not task oriented per se, but they're focused sort of on the mission. They want to put in the effort, and they want to work. They don't care about the accolades. So, again, it's this, the river is another example of one of many, and I'm sure we're going to talk about many more as we do many more podcasts. Not every day on the river was a good day. There were challenges with the rapids, bad self-talk days, and days when Patricia was tired and lonely. On one particular bad day, the heavy rain had been following her down the river. Cold, wet, and tired, she put into camp for the night. She grabbed her tent off the raft and tried to quickly set it up, but the wind sent the tent tumbling down. As she became drenched, she had to go back to the raft to take her personal bags off. She threw them into the inside of the tent, which now resembled a wet sandbox. She took out dry clothes and tried to warm herself. Later, she built a small shelter for her one-burner stove just outside the tent's doorway. With dinner inside, she then knocked the pot off the stove. There was nothing to salvage. Quote, a tear slid down my cheek. I spent the past 2 days wishing for solitude, and now that I have it, I felt alone and vulnerable. Somewhere in the rain, I lost that strong woman in the mirror. Instead, I'm scattered like dry autumn leaves in a wind, unsure of who I am and what strengths I actually possess. End quote. Huh. Coping with bad days. Everybody has them. And, it's this feeling of failure and just of defeat. And, part of me, I used to say, like, suck it up, buttercup, and just grind through it. And, now, I don't know. Part of me thinks embrace that feeling of failure and of defeat, and embrace what that makes you, sort of just literally what that makes you feel, because you want to know what that feeling is so that you don't get there very often, and then suck it up, buttercup.
Yeah, there are definitely those days where you feel like nothing's going right, nothing you do is working, and it's just it feels hopeless at times. And I'm very much an optimist in most cases, but sometimes there are just those days where I can't see the silver lining in anything. But I think you're right that you have to kind of accept that those days happen, and at the same time see the value in them. And Pam Houston talked about that, kind of stringing along these beads of like successes and failures that kind of make up your path. And I think what's important is we know everything that Patricia just went through and what she's going to accomplish, and she is going to finish this solo mission. And so while we can see that this is just a moment along the way, you can really get the sense that she feels like that's everything right in that moment, that it feels like it's never gonna get better, or it doesn't matter that you've accomplished what you have, especially when you're having those bad days.
Here's my real problem with defeat and failure. It can eat you alive. I mean, I think you have to recognize it for what it is. I think you have to recognize, okay, that was a defeat, or I feel defeated, or that was an absolute failure. That was a moment that was not good, or that was a day that wasn't good, or that was something that happened that didn't go well. Because if you don't recognize it for what it is, you're doomed to repeat it. It's going to eat you. You'll continue to circle back on it, loop back on it. It's not gonna be good. On the other hand, if you dwell in it and you can't let it go, it'll also eat you, and you won't be able to move forward. So it's this sort of, you gotta go both ways on it. And I've been there. I've done it both directions, and it just, the quicker you can process it and then let it go, I think the better off you're going to be. Definitely, that's what's worked for me.
Yeah, I agree.
Patricia's journey down the river ended right where it had began those years ago, at the end of Canyon. Quote, gone is the gurgle and murmur of the river, gone is the life-giving force. This is the loneliness I dreaded before my journey began, the loneliness I expected as a daily companion. I was fortunate that it only touched me lightly when I was upstream. I am not ready to return. I need to begin the trip over again. There is still so much to learn. With the darkness, memories sweep over me. The camps, the rapids, the feelings of elation and despondency, the people I met, and most of all the spirituality that touched me between these hallowed walls. I don't know what lies ahead, and the thought of never seeing the canyon again may always fill me with pain. I do know that I must let go of my need for it, to remember that often when we desire something too much, we inadvertently push it away. It is time for me to move on. My search for freedom has led me into a trap. It is only through commitment, first to myself, then perhaps to another, that I can ever know complete freedom. End quote. And so in a way, as she's bringing this journey through Canyon to an end, she's almost finding freedom. Freedom from her unresolved thoughts, but also she's saying a goodbye, and she thought she needed the river. And in essence, leaving the river behind is going to bring her a different kind of freedom.
Yeah, and I think that, obviously the rapids were a symbol of this journey that she needed to kind of start on, and she still needs to finish it and go on to the next phase of what that would be. And I definitely know that there's times where I don't feel ready to transition back into real life after kind of a really a strong point of growth, because I often fear that maybe I am not strong enough to hold on to something that I've really realized is very important to me and make the sacrifices necessary to uphold that new, whether it's just a new idea, or it's a new activity, or a value even. But it's really amazing how quickly she was able to kind of get in touch with everything. And I think that what struck me most about this is if there's any way that I can kind of carve out my own solo trips, even in the everyday life, that whether it's that alone time or really just kind of allowing myself to strip away all those external pressures to really listen to myself and think about critically what I need to improve upon. That's really a challenge, but I think that that's going to be really important to try to do.
Yeah, I think that it's really hard when you take a journey like this, when you're expecting, your expectations are high. You want it to be something life-changing. You want it to resolve something for you. You need it to be something for you. And you take it, and it's something much better and much crazier and much more amazing than you thought it could ever be. And then you get to the end of it, and you knew it was going to come to an end. You knew it. She knew it the whole time. The river is only 277 miles long, right? She knows that the canyon only carries the river so far, and she knows it's going to empty at the end, and she knows she's going to have to move on. But when she gets to the end, it's hard, and it's hard to say goodbye. And it's been a wild and crazy adventure for her, and it's not as easy to turn around and leave it as she probably thought it would be. And I don't think she pondered that moment very well. And I don't think she had thought about what she was going to do in that moment. And I don't think that she really considered what it was going to be like in that moment. And so when she's there, she's kind of trying to process everything, and she's trying to process all of her feelings and thoughts. And now she's realizing that after doing this has brought her to where she is now free. She can now move on with her life. She's now processed everything that she needed to process. She's been able to, have her independence and get rid of all of those unknown thoughts and those unresolved segments of her life. It has given her everything that she ever needed. And now she can move on. And on that note, that's all we have for today. Thanks for listening to Patricia's story and for sharing this experience with us. You can also interact with us, follow us, and learn more about upcoming episodes on our website at modernathenas.com, on our Facebook page under Modern Athenas, our Twitter at Modern Athenas, and our Instagram at the Modern Athenas Podcast. We'd also appreciate if you support our podcast by leaving us a review on iTunes or Stitcher and subscribing to the podcast. In our next podcast, we will be discussing the book A Nurse's Story, Life, Death, and In Between an Intensive Care Unit by Tilda Shelloff. As we leave you today, we want to remind you to never forget that each of you, like all of the Modern Athenas we've discussed on the podcast, has the power and capacity to be a change maker in your world. Work hard, dream big, and reach for the stars.